I never thought I'd share this story, but now I'm 30 years old, and I'm finally ready to tell it. My name is Kiera, and this is how my life has changed forever. When I was 13, we were, as they say, an ordinary family. Mom, Dad, and I lived in our cozy house. Dad worked at a construction site, and Mom worked as a part-time accountant. We weren't rich, but we were happy. We watched old movies in the evenings, baked pies together on weekends, and sometimes went fishing, a simple, calm happiness in which there was no place for fear. Everything fell apart when my father had an accident. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning. Dad smiled, kissed Mom, then the top of my head, and went to work. And a few hours later, he was gone. An accident, they said. A moment later, the man disappeared. Mom couldn't stand it. She fell apart, completely fell apart. She sat at the window in the evenings, staring into the void. She was silent for hours. Sometimes I could hear her crying softly in the bathroom, locked from the inside. I quickly realized that I was alone. That now I have to take care not only of myself, but also of her. One evening, about 6 months after Dad's death, she called me into the kitchen. She was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee in her hands. She always held it tightly when she was nervous. It was as if that thin white porcelain cup was keeping her from completely falling into the abyss. "Kiera, dear," she said, her voice trembling, but her gaze was steady. "I have something important to tell you." I didn't say anything, but my stomach clenched. I knew that what I heard would change everything. I met a man. "His name is James," she said, looking down at the cup. "He makes me happy again." I should have seen this coming. Late-night phone calls. Sudden attention to makeup, hairstyle, new clothes. Mysterious errands when Mom hurriedly left the house. But the premonition did not ease the blow. "He's moving in with us," she continued after a pause. "Together with his daughter. Sarah." The words echoed in my head. "He'll move. With my daughter." I felt my breath catch in my throat. "But, Mom," I tried to protest, but she interrupted me. "Kiera," her voice became firmer, almost cold. "I know how you feel, but life goes on. James is a good man. And Sarah needs a mother. Family." That's what she called it. We can be a family again. 2 weeks later, James moved in. Boxes of things, silent glances, feigned politeness. And then there's Sarah. A 6-year-old girl with golden pigtails and huge blue eyes that seemed too innocent. She looked at our house as if it were a castle from a fairy tale. And Mom was looking at her. With such warmth, with some new, unfamiliar tenderness. "Look at her, Kiera," Mom would say, smiling as if Sarah were her own child. "Isn't she lovely? She needs so much love and attention." I nodded, but my chest was on fire. Because I already knew who that love belonged to now. With each passing week, Mom became more and more lost in the role of a caring stepmother. I saw her braiding Sarah's hair, stroking her dress, laughing with her like she hadn't laughed with me in months. I watched them as if they were a play in which I had no role. But a real chill ran through my skin when I first met James' mother. This woman, who has become my personal nightmare, appeared in our house with a smile stretched like a badly stitched wound. She came up to me, looked me up and down, and suddenly grabbed my cheek. She pinched me so hard that I wanted to scream. "What a big girl," she drawled, and there was something nasty, sticky in her voice. "Such a beautiful face." Her fingers dug into his skin like claws. I could feel the bruises under them. She looked at James, at Mom, then back at me, as if I were an unnecessary element spoiling the perfect picture. "You know, James," she said, "this house would be perfect." She didn't finish, but I didn't need an explanation. I saw the way she looked at me. As if I'm superfluous. A spot on the perfect canvas of a new family. Later, in my room, I stood by the mirror, examining the dark marks on my cheek. When I showed them to my mom, she just shook her head. It's like it's my own fault. It's like I saw a vision. Life became routine. But it was someone else's routine. James, Sarah, and Mom were laughing nearby. They organized trips to the park, movie screenings, and dinners full of laughter. And I found myself visiting Jacqueline, my mother's friend, more and more often. It was as if my mother had found a way to remove me from this new life, from which I seemed to only interfere. Mom said, "Dear Kiera, Jacqueline needs help with little Emily today. You don't mind?" But it didn't sound like a request. It was a verdict. "So get lost," she added with a look. I walked silently to Jacqueline's house, where at least someone seemed really happy to see me. Emily was only 4 years old, but there was so much genuine joy in her eyes that I couldn't help but smile. As soon as I entered the house, she would run up to me, screaming, "Ari! Ari!" That's what she called me, unable to pronounce my name correctly. But I liked it. There was something warm and real in those sounds. We built fortresses out of blankets, had tea parties for her plush toys, and made up stories where I made silly voices to make her laugh. In those moments, I could forget that only coldness and indifference awaited me at home. Jacqueline brought us snacks, sometimes sat next to us, asked about school and, surprisingly, really listened to my answers. It was easy to breathe in her house. There were no other people's stares that burned right through me, and there were no words that made me want to disappear. It was warm there, the way a family should probably feel. But it was different at home. Bertha, James' mother, seemed to have practically moved in with us. She was omnipresent, like a spirit dwelling in every corner of our house. She rearranged the furniture, criticized the curtains, suggested new colors of paint for the walls, and Mom jumped up and down to fulfill her every wish. "These walls should be the color of eggshells, not cream," Bertha insisted. And now my mother is in the hardware store, choosing paints, anxiously weighing the shades, as if the fate of the world depended on it. The furniture in the living room needs to be rearranged. More air. More light, Bertha said, and Mom spent the whole weekend moving heavy cabinets, tables, and chairs, wiping sweat from her forehead and nervously looking back at the result. But her favorite thing to do was torture me. She would come up unexpectedly, grab my cheeks with her bony fingers and squeeze so hard that I thought my skin would crack. "Still haven't learned how to hold a fork properly," she said, grinning. "Such bad manners. Your mother should have taught you better." And the pinch was getting stronger. I looked away, swallowing back tears, and thought only of one thing: how not to cry. How not to give her this pleasure. Sometimes she caught me reading on the couch. "Look at you," she hissed. "You're slouching like an old granny. No wonder you have such a terrible posture. You'll never see my Sarah sitting like this." Every word she said hit me like a whip. James was no better. If I accidentally knocked over a glass or dropped a plate while washing dishes, it exploded. "Do you know how much it costs?" "Stop it," he shouted, and his face turned red. "Of course not. You've never earned a dime in your life. You're just a freeloader, living off my hard work." "I'm sorry," I muttered, trying to clean up the broken glass or wipe up the spilled milk. "Sorry is not a substitute for things," he continued. "You eat my food, you wear the clothes I pay for, you live in my house. And what are you doing? You just break things and create a mess." At such times, I looked for my mother. I was looking for some kind of sign. At least a shadow of support. But she was silent. She looked through me like through a transparent glass, cleaning the kitchen or playing with Sarah. It was as if she hadn't heard anything. It was like I wasn't there. When I turned 16, I made a decision. I'm not going to be James's freeloader anymore. I won't ask. I will not allow myself to be humiliated for food, for shelter, for every little thing. Getting up early in the morning, I took old sheets of paper and wrote handwritten ads: dog walking. Responsibly. Reliable. Kiera. I've hung them all over the neighborhood. Near shops, at bus stops, on poles near playgrounds. By noon, I already had 3 clients. One of them, Mrs. Ross, a woman from 2 streets, greeted me warily. What about your studies? Teenagers have so many tasks now. I straightened up, trying to sound confident. I have good grades. I take a responsible approach to business. She stared at me for a long time, as if trying to see into my soul, to see if I could be trusted. But she still gave me the leash of her old but kind golden retriever. Okay. Let's try it. Every day after school. $10 for a walk. That was the beginning. Very quickly, I got more clients. I walked 5 different dogs. On weekends, she looked after the twins from the house across the street. I helped old Mr. Scott with his shopping, brought him groceries, and took out the trash. I came home tired, my legs were aching, my hands were scratched, but I kept my first earned money in my pocket and felt that it was mine. My efforts. My freedom. My first opportunity to be someone. Jacqueline officially hired me as a babysitter for Emily after school. It seemed strange, because I already took care of her for free. I played, read, helped with dinner when Jacqueline was busy. But now it was official, and I got paid for every night I spent with Emily. I didn't spend a dime. Not for candy, not for movies, not for the clothes that girls my age were so proud of. I was putting the money in an old box hidden at the bottom of the closet. Every dollar was a step towards freedom, a small brick in the wall that I was building between myself and the life that was being imposed on me. After 3 months, I had enough to buy what I dreamed of, a smartphone. Nothing special, just a basic model bought at a discount, but it was mine. The first thing I bought with only my money, which I earned. When I brought him home, I couldn't stop smiling. I had something of my own, something that James couldn't touch, for which no one could say, "It's because of us." I was sitting in my room, setting up my phone, filling it with my music, photos, creating a small world that belonged only to me, when the door opened. Sarah. She ran in without knocking, as she used to, and stopped in the middle of the room, her gaze immediately glued to my phone. What is it? Stop it, she demanded, her eyes sparkling like those of a hunter who has just discovered prey. This is my new phone, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. I bought it with money from work. Sarah's eyes widened. 9 years old. 9 years of pampered life, when every wish turned into reality. I want a phone too, she declared, and then, before I could open my mouth, she turned around and rushed down the stairs. Daddy. I heard her scream. Kiera has a phone, and I want the same one. The words stabbed into me like a knife. I knew what was coming next even before I heard James' heavy footsteps on the stairs. My stomach clenched, and my breathing became short. What's wrong, princess? I heard his voice from the doorway. Sarah was standing there, pointing at me. Kiera has a phone. I also want. I still remember with fury what happened next. James didn't say a word. He just came over, snatched the phone out of my hands, as if I were a thief caught in the act, and handed it to Sarah. Daddy's got your back, honey, he said, and hugged her. It's that simple. My work, my efforts, are going nowhere. I stood with my teeth clenched, blood pounding in my temples. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab my phone back, but I knew how it would end. I knew the price of disobedience. The next day at school, I couldn't concentrate. Everything was blurring before my eyes. Every thought, every word, every number disappeared under the weight of anger and humiliation. When the lesson ended, I stayed at my desk until Mrs. Flores, my English teacher, came over. "Kiera, is everything okay?" "What is it?" she asked. And I couldn't stand it. She told me everything. About the phone. About James. About his screams. About Mom's silence. About how I fall asleep every night thinking that I'm not needed in my own home. Mrs. Flores listened in silence. Her face remained calm, but her eyes. There was something in her eyes that made me feel better. She didn't turn away. She didn't say, "It's a family matter." She just got up and took me to the principal's office. By noon, my mother was called. I was not present at the meeting, but I heard voices. Loud. Tough ones. Mom's words sounded like sharp stones being dropped on tiles. When she came out, her face was purple. "My phone is in my hand." She shoved it at me without even looking into my eyes. "I hope you're happy now," she said through gritted teeth. I didn't answer. I wasn't even breathing. I just took my phone and hid in my room. But it didn't end there. That night, when Sarah was sobbing in her room, mourning the loss of her phone, Mom burst into my room. The door slammed shut with such a sound that my heart skipped a beat. "How dare you?" "Stop it," she hissed. "How dare you do this behind our backs? Do you know how awkward that was? Do you know what position you've put us in?" I didn't know what to say. Any words were meaningless. "You're just a traitor," she said, and then she walked out, leaving me in deafening silence. And everything. After that, they seemed to forget about my existence. James, Mom, even Sarah. They walked past me like I was furniture. The invisible man. At dinner, the dishes were passed by me like an empty chair. 2 years. 2 years of this kind of life. I worked. I cleaned, walked the dogs, looked after the children. I didn't stick my head out, I didn't talk, I didn't argue. I studied. I focused on every task, every test, every essay. Because I knew it was my only ticket. And so, in my last year of school, I applied for all the scholarships I could find. I searched for them at night, wrote letters, filled out questionnaires. Every leaf is a hope. When the letter from the state college arrived, I almost collapsed from excitement. I waited until I was alone in the room to open it. My hands were shaking. The envelope resisted, as if it didn't want to let its secret out. "Dear Miss Thompson, we are pleased to inform you." I reread it 3 times. And only then did I realize. Full scholarship. They gave me a full scholarship. I did it. I thought maybe it would make a difference. Maybe Mom will see me again. He'll see that I tried. That I've been fighting all this time. I waited until dinner. That evening, when everyone was sitting at the table, I made up my mind. My heart was pounding in my chest like a bird trapped in a trap. "Mom, James. I have some good news," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. They continued to eat without even looking up. "I went to public college," I said, and the words hung in the air like a drop about to fall. James's fork clattered on his plate. He looked at me, his face instantly filled with anger. "Did you apply to college without telling me?" His voice was venomous. "Who do you think you are? Are you living in my house, eating my food, and making these decisions behind my back?" I swallowed, trying to stay calm. "This is a full scholarship. You won't have to pay anything," I explained, feeling my voice tremble. James grunted, and it sounded like a spit. Damn right, I wouldn't have paid anything. Not a penny for an ungrateful freeloader like you. Always sneaking around, always plotting something. I desperately turned to my mom, catching her eye. She kept her head down, picking at her food with her fork, as if I were just a shadow flickering past the edge of her vision. Mom, I whispered. Please say something. Why don't you stick up for me? She finally looked up. But there was no warmth in them. Just cold. Ice. Why should I? Her voice was quiet, but every syllable was like a hammer. You've never shown any respect for this family. I've never accepted James. All you've been doing is trying to ruin my marriage from day one. Something inside me snapped. Something that I've been trying to hold on to for a long time, hiding under a layer of hope. Everything I've done has been in vain. Respect? I repeated, and my voice rang with anger. Respect him? He's a bully and a tyrant. There is nothing in it that deserves respect. And then everything happened. The slap was as fast as lightning. Mom hit me. At first, I only felt the heat. And then the pain. She was standing in front of me, her hands still raised, as if she didn't believe what she had just done. Get out, she whispered, and then louder, get out of my house. I stood there, touching my burning cheek. Everything seemed like a dream. Or a nightmare. Everything was too quiet, too unnatural. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel my legs carrying me up. I was just walking. A few days later, I packed a backpack. Telephone. School documents. Some money that I saved. Everything else will have to be left. It was no longer my home. I could hear Sarah laughing downstairs. I heard James's voice. But all these sounds were far away, as if I was standing behind glass, watching someone else's life. 10 minutes later, I was standing on the porch of Jenny's house, the only person I could turn to. The girl from my biology class, the only one who sometimes held my gaze, who asked how I was doing. I called her that night when I didn't know where else to go. When she opened the door and saw my face, my backpack, and the tears I hadn't even noticed on my cheeks, she didn't ask a single question. She just pulled me inside and hugged me. I was sitting in her kitchen, hugging my knees, and trying to figure out what to do next. How will I cope with college? How will I live if I'm essentially homeless? Then her aunt, Maria, came into the room. A woman in her 50s, with sharp features, but with a warm, attentive gaze. So you're the girl Jenny told me about, she said, glancing at me. Do you need a job? It turned out that Maria owned a small Italian restaurant in the city center. And she had an empty studio apartment above this restaurant. Before I realized what was going on, Maria offered me a job and a place to live. Half the rent, free meals, flexible working hours. We'll adapt to your classes. The apartment needs finishing, but it's clean and safe, she said, as if she hadn't performed a miracle. I started working as a waitress. I studied on the go, absorbing every little thing about the business. Maria was strict but fair. She taught me not only to set the tables, but also to look deeper. Do you see how this table is constantly sending food back? She was saying. That's why we document every complaint and every compliment. In business, details are important. The apartment was tiny. It barely contained a bed, an old wardrobe, and a mini fridge. But she was mine. No one was yelling at me. No one called her a freeloader. No one came in without knocking. I could sleep. To study. Breathe. By the last year of my studies, Maria promoted me to administrator. I worked with documents, dealt with supplies, and controlled schedules. And on Saturday I got my diploma. The business degree I'd been dreaming about for so many years. I stood on the stage, looking into the audience, and I knew that none of my family was there. But I didn't care. Because I did it myself. On Monday morning, I was back at work. Now I was in charge of schedules, inventory, and personnel management. I knew the restaurant like the back of my hand. Maria once told me, "I have a present." It was 2 years later, after I had worked my way up to manager. She was sitting in her office, looking tired but happy. The light from the desk lamp softly illuminated her face. "Jenny tells me that you two were talking about a partnership," Maria began, and I shifted nervously in my chair. "We discussed it, but only as a dream, as a conversation between friends that ends with the words, someday, maybe. We discussed it, but—" I started, but Maria raised her hand, interrupting me. "Okay," she said, and her voice was calm, even. "Because I'm retiring." My thoughts froze. "The restaurant goes to Jenny," Maria continued. "But she knows someone who knows the business inside out. Someone like you." My heart almost stopped. "You're saying—" I couldn't finish. "I'm saying that you two should run this place together," she said. "Equal partners. You have experience. Jenny has a passion. It can be a powerful combination." I was stunned. Jenny and I stayed up all night talking about it. She dreamed of a new menu, an interior renovation, and new events. I was thinking about stability, about the process, about expansion. We had different views, but the common desire was to make this place a success. Present. Ours. "We can do this," Jenny said, her eyes shining with excitement. "Really do it, Kiera. Make it ours." And we did. I invested everything I had. All the savings I've been saving up for years. Jenny brought her ideas, her vision. Together we have transformed Maria's traditional Italian restaurant into something unique. The years passed. We opened a second establishment in another area of the city. And that was also a success. Sometimes, walking between the tables, watching the waiters deftly serve the guests, how the wine filled the glasses, how the customers smiled, I thought about my family. 11 years have passed since the night my mom slapped me and kicked me out of the house. I knew they were still living in the city. Sometimes I accidentally came across their photos on social networks. Weddings, holidays, lovely home-cooked dinners. But our lives were separated. Different. Strangers. One day, Jenny and I were sitting in our office above a restaurant in the city center. Tables, diagrams, and expansion plans were laid out around. We discussed suppliers, the menu for the next season, and a new advertising campaign. The guests began to gather in the hall below. Laughter, clinking glasses, quiet conversations. "Looks like an engagement party," Jenny said, glancing at the booking schedule. 50 people. It should be a good evening. We had a tradition. From the moment we first started working at the restaurant, we went out into the hall, talked with customers, found out their opinions, and asked about their impressions. It was one of those little things that made us special. "I'm going to check on them," I said, pulling on my trademark blazer and attaching my badge to it. "You finish with these contracts." I went down the stairs. I could hear the laughter getting louder, and someone clinking glasses. A big party is always a chance. Maybe they'll come back. Maybe they'll order something else. I adjusted my badge and put on my professional smile. And then I saw them. Mom was sitting at the main table. Her hair was grayer, but it was styled perfectly, as always. James is nearby. He's changed, but he's still the same. And Sarah. In a shiny dress, she was holding the hand of a man in an expensive suit. My sister's engagement party. The world rocked. For a second, I thought about turning around, running back to the office, shutting myself in my world. But before I could take a single step, Mom's eyes met mine. And I saw recognition in them. "Well, look who it is," her voice echoed through the hall, making heads turn. "Our waitress for the evening." I felt the faces of the guests turn to me. 30 years old, and you're still waiting tables," James grinned. I opened my mouth to speak. Something, anything. But Mom beat me to it. "I always knew you'd end up like this," she said, her voice laced with venom. "Look at your sister. A college graduate. Economist. She's getting married to a wonderful man. And you? You're still wearing your badge and taking orders." Sarah giggled, squeezing her fiancé's hand. "Maybe she'll wash our dishes today," she said, grinning. "Daddy, show us your special skills." The floors too. Laughter. Their laughter is like blows. I stood there, with a frozen smile, feeling my heart pounding in my ears. My whole life, my efforts, my path, in their eyes it was nothing. Worn down to dust. But I stood there. And watched. James stood up, swaying slightly. He must have been drinking. His eyes were cloudy, his movements uncertain. Actually, he grinned. "Let's give her something to clean up right now." It happened quickly. He grabbed a plate of salad and threw it on the floor with force. There was a clang, and the pieces flew apart. I felt a sharp stab of pain in my cheek and automatically touched it. The tips of my fingers turned red. "Oh," James chuckled, looking at the blood trickling down my face. "Better get a mop." Waitress. I stood there, feeling the blood dripping onto the white fabric of my shirt, and everything inside me was boiling. 11 years of resentment, anger, and pain. I was ready to say everything that I had been holding in for so long. I am ready to shatter their false confidence, their cruel jokes, their confidence in their power over me. But before I could open my mouth, Jenny's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "I think this situation requires immediate attention," she said, approaching us with such calmness, which sounded like strength brought up by years of work and determination. In her hands was a leather-bound service agreement decorated with gold and the logo of our restaurant. She stopped in front of the table and cleared her throat. There was an oppressive silence in the hall. "In accordance with Section 3.2 of our agreement," she said, her voice steady and clear, "any customers who verbally abuse or physically harm our staff or the owner." She paused, glancing at my bloody cheek. "Will be removed from the premises immediately." Mom looked up sharply. "What are you talking about?" Her voice was trembling, but more from confusion than anger. Jenny grinned, but her smile was cold, razor sharp. "Oh, didn't you know?" she said, turning to her mother. "You're talking to Kiera Thompson, co-owner of this establishment. And 3 more restaurants all over the city." The silence that followed these words was deafening. I saw the color drain from Mom's face as her eyes darted around the room, stopping at the elegant decor, the sophisticated clientele, the framed reviews on the walls. It was more than just a restaurant. It was a success. The kind of success she'd never seen. Which she didn't even try to notice. "That's impossible," James muttered, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. "In addition," Jenny continued, without giving anyone time to recover, "in the event of an attack, we reserve the right to immediately terminate the service without a refund." She turned to me. "Kiera, your choice." I slowly wiped the blood from my cheek, straightened my jacket, and looked around the room. Then she raised her head. "Clear the tables," I ordered. "All 50 guests must leave the premises immediately." The waiters froze, then nodded and began to clear away the plates, glasses, and cutlery. Everything happened with honed professionalism. I stood there, not taking my eyes off my family. And then I heard a familiar screech. "You can't do this!" Mrs. Henderson screamed, clutching her plate of pasta like it was a treasure. "This is the engagement of my son's daughter." One of the waiters, Miguel, politely reached out to take the plate, but she abruptly pulled it away. The sauce flew apart, drops fell on the white tablecloth. "Help me! They're attacking me!" She screamed, as she had once screamed, pinching my cheeks and humiliating me at the table. James lurched forward, his face bloodshot with rage. "Get your hands off my mother!" "Stop it!" he roared and came towards me, clenching his fists. But our guards were faster. 2 people stepped between us, blocking his path. The third raised his hand, his voice calm but adamant. "The police are on their way." Sarah burst into tears. Her perfectly planned party had crumbled like a house of cards. "Mom, do something." "Stop it," she howled, but Mom stood there in silence. Mascara was running down her cheeks. She looked lost, broken. The woman who once hit me and kicked me out of the house now couldn't even meet my eyes. The next 30 minutes were chaos. The police arrived first. They interviewed witnesses, some of whom had already filmed the events on their phones. James was handcuffed. He struggled, shouting threats, but they took him out. Then the ambulance arrived. The paramedic cleaned and bandaged the cut on my cheek. I sat there, staring at my mom, who was still standing off to the side, like a shadow. The guests left the restaurant, whispering to each other, glancing first at me and then at my family. Some quietly apologized, others were silent, lowering their heads. When the hall was empty, I was finally able to take a deep breath. Jenny came over and put her hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" I nodded, not believing that my voice would obey me. "It was the right thing to do," she said, her eyes shining with determination. "You deserve your life. And no one has the right to take it away from you." My phone rang 3 days after the incident. An unknown number. I stared at the screen, hesitating, but eventually I answered. "Kiera, please don't hang up." Mom's voice was low, almost pleading, not at all the way it sounded in the restaurant. I was silent. "Look at James," she began, her voice shaking. "The police are pressing charges. He might lose his job. You need to drop the charges." "No," I said simply, and hung up. A few hours later, the attacks began on social media. The first post was from Mom. It's long, dramatic, full of feigned remorse and a carefully constructed victim image. She talked about her cruel daughter, about the vindictive restaurant owner who ruined her precious daughter's engagement. The comments were full of sympathy. People, not knowing the whole story, swore never to visit our restaurants. Then Sarah joined her. Her post was even angrier. She wrote about a psychotic stepsister who can't stand her younger sister's happiness. The post quickly spread to local community groups. I was sitting in the office, staring at the phone screen, reading lies. I felt rage and powerlessness tearing at me from the inside out. "You know that we have all this on video, right?" Jenny's voice rang out, and I looked up at her. She stood in the doorway, calm and confident. "The security system that Maria installed many years ago. The cameras zoom in and record sound when they detect raised voices or aggressive movements." She came up to me and put the flash drive on the table. "The footage is crystal clear. You can hear every word. James's threats, your mom's insults, Mrs. Henderson's screams." I nodded silently. That same night, I posted a video in the comments to my mom's tirade. Without explanation. Simply. That's what really happened. The video exploded overnight. People shared it, commented on it, and asked. Other guests from the party started posting their notes. One clip, shot from a perfect angle, showed Miguel trying to take a plate from Mrs. Henderson as she screamed, her face contorted with rage, and pasta sauce flew around the room. His calmness in this chaos was amazing. This clip has gained millions of views. The story began to gain popularity, first in the city, then at the national level. Cooking blogs picked it up. The headlines talked about a family drama at an engagement party and a restaurant where the truth found its way. But something else was more important. People in the comments began to share their stories about family conflicts, toxic parents, and how difficult it is sometimes to break a bond that only causes pain. The consequences were not long in coming. James' company, already embarrassed by his arrest, couldn't ignore the viral video of him attacking me in my own restaurant. He was quietly transferred to a lower position. The court found him guilty of assault and property damage. Mom tried to control the damage by hastily deleting her posts, but screenshots were already circulating on the internet. The scandal, once unleashed, cannot be stopped. Sarah's wedding venue was cancelled. They didn't want to get involved in this scandal. And Mrs. Henderson? Her face, distorted with anger, clutching a plate of pasta, became a meme. A woman with pasta, this image has spread across the web. I've been watching it. Follow the growth of views and comments. And suddenly I remembered how I told myself in the dark days after my mother kicked me out of the house, someday everything will be different. Someday I will have a chance to make peace with my family. Someday they'll realize what they've done and try to fix it. I've believed in this someday for a long time. But seeing them in my restaurant, seeing how they tried to humiliate me, destroy me even now, after all these years, I finally realized that not everything can be fixed. Not all bridges are subject to restoration. The video eventually benefited the business. People came to see the place where that very scene took place. Our restaurants have become famous. But I didn't save this video on my profile for the sake of business. I kept it as a reminder to myself and others. A reminder that not always a happy ending is about forgiveness or reunion. Sometimes happiness is accepting that it's okay to leave. And never look back. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.